Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel Code for Tech Solutions. In our previous videos, we have covered what are the microservices, what are the benefits of using microservice architecture or monolithic architecture, and now it's time to create our first microservice. So in this video, we are going to cover how to build your first Spring Boot microservice, and it's a complete guide which will help you to create your first microservice using Spring Boot. Now we are going to create this microservice, which is a user-service, which will be connecting to the H2 database, and we are going to create one controller with some endpoints. Like we will create one endpoint which will fetch all users which are there into the H2 database, and we will create one more endpoint with HTTP post method which will create a new user into the database, and this is the JSON which will get inserted into the database. In short, like we are going to create a complete new microservice using Spring Boot, which will be running on some dedicated port and which will own its database, and its database is a H2 database we are going to use. And I will request you all to please do not forget to like, subscribe and share, and also please do not forget to watch this from start to end, because if you miss any step in between, so you will not replicate the similar kind of application as I am going to create. Now let us open Spring Tool Suite, and here we can mention the project folder and click on launch. To create a Spring Boot project or a microservice, we can use this option, create new Spring Starter project, and here we can give our project name, like let's say it's a user service, and we can choose type as a Maven, packaging as a ZAR, language as a Java, and here we can select the version. I am using 21, so I can select 21, and for groups we can use com.users or user. Artifact and version we can keep as is, and this is the description we can mention. This is related to user service, or we can say description, and here for package we can use com.user. You can verify it once and click on next button. On the next page, on this page, we need to mention the dependencies, what all things we are going to use. Like we are going to use Spring Web, next like Spring Data JPA, next like we are going to use H2 database, and we are going to use Lomback. So this much dependency is enough to create our microservice. We can click on next button and click on finish button. We can see in the left pane it has created the user service microservice with all the default files and folders. We can open the pom.xml file, and here we can check whether all the dependency is there as expected. Under dependencies section, we have this Spring Data JPA. With this library, it will help us to connect with the database layer, and we can make use of annotations available to create the entity and repository with this library or dependency. We can use like Spring Web. It will help us to create the RESTful services using REST API with HTTP protocol, and this is the H2 database. With this library we can connect with the H2 database, and this is the Lomback. It will help us to reduce the boilerplate code and automatically generates getter, setters and various other method related code. So this is the Lomback dependency. So we have added all the required dependencies to create this project. Now here it is showing some red, so let us resolve that. So we can replace HTTP with HTTPS, and we can save this. Here we can see we are using Java version 21. It is reflecting it here as well. Now let us check by running our application. We can run our application using command run as, and here we can select Spring Boot. Now we can see our application is started successfully on port 8080. This is the default port, and it is using embedded Tomcat. So it has, our application is started on Tomcat on port 8080. Now let us add our code. So what we can do, like we can add a configuration file. By default it is using application.properties file. So let us delete this and we can create one new application.yaml file. We can use application.properties or YAML file, either will do fine. So here we can add our entries like server.port. Now for each microservice, in the context of microservice, each microservice should use a different port. So for that reason we are going to mention some dedicated port for this service. Next, like we are going to add our application name, and here we can say it's a user-service. Next we are going to add data source. Inside that we are going to mention the URLs. Now it is showing the rate for these entries. So let me add the code for this one. So let me copy this code. So instead of resolving these things, like it will take time. So what I will do, like I will show you, if time permits, I will create one video and I will show you how you can resolve these errors and how we can create a correct indentation so that these errors should not occur. For now we are adding this code stuff related to the properties, like this is the server and port number we can change or we can keep as is. This is our application name, this is the data source, this is the URL. We are using the H2 database, in memory database, and this is the database name user_db. This is the driver class name, we are going to use username and password. And this is the H2 console, we are making it enable as the true so that whatever queries it will get executed, that we can see inside console. And this is the path, H2 console. With this we can see the database on browser, database entries we can cross check on the browser by hitting this URL. And this is the JPA related properties, we can keep DDL-auto as an update, show SQL as the true, it will show the executed queries in the console. And this is the database platform, and here we are mentioning the H2 dialect, which is the dialect for H2 database, and we can save it. Now next thing, let us create a packaging for this application. So let us create packages, like we require entity, we need repository, and we require service as well, and we need controller. Now let us create our first class, entity class, and we can name like it's a user details. For this we can add all the necessary annotations, like we can add all our constructors, no or constructors. First is the main thing, like we need to add entity as well, because this is the entity. Next, like we can add data. These are the Lombac related annotations we can make use of. So this entity we can place it here. So these many required annotations we have added, and we can save it. Now next thing, we can mention what all properties we are going to use. So these properties will get mapped with the database tables. We have mentioned our database name like UserDB. Now here we can use private long ID as a first field. Next we can mention as the name. Next we can mention email, next we can mention like address, this is the address, and after this, like here these are many fields we are going to use like id, name, email and address. Now here we need to add id annotation, and how we are going to generate the id, that again we need to mention, and we can use like generated value annotation. Inside that we need to mention what strategy we are going to use. So let me add the import for these two, and here for strategy we can use like generation type as an auto, and we can save it. With this we are done with our entity class. Now let us create our repository class. Repository interface we need to create, and here we can name it like user repository. Here we can annotate it with using a repository, and this is an interface. It should extends, let's say we can use CRUD. We have various options to implement the interfaces, extend the interfaces. Right now we can use CRUD repository. And here we can mention our entity name, which is user details, and the data type of its primary field, which is a long. We can add import for these two. With this we are done with our repository class. Now let us focus on service creation, and here first we can create our interface for service, and we can name it like user service. And here inside that we can mention what all methods we are going to use. Like first it will return all the user details, and here we can use like get all users, or we can say retrieve users. So this method basically returns all the users which are available inside database. Next we can add one more method which will create user details into database. So for that we can use like create user, and inside that we need to pass the input user details which we are going to create or insert into the database, and we can save it. So with this we have mentioned what is the interface and what are the interface methods we are going to use. Now let us create one implementer class inside which we are going to implement all these methods, like user service IMPL class we can use, and here we need to annotate it using stereotype as a service, and this implementer class should implement our interface which is user service. And for this, like we need to add all the unimplemented methods. Now here to implement these two methods, first we need to inject our repository into service using auto add, and we can mention our user repository. and we can call return like, and on this we can call the find all method, and this find all method will need to cast to the list of user details. So this is for retrieving all the users from the database. Similar way, we can add one method which will add the user entry into the database. And this is the input user which we are going to create into the database, and we can save it. So this is for getting all the users and creating a new user into the database. We have completed the user interface and its implementer class. Now let us focus on creating our controller. Now this is the controller. Inside that we can create one class with name user controller. Here we can annotate using like race controller, and here we need to inject our service into the controller. So for that we can use private our service, which is user service, and we can add import for these two. And after this we can add like first is a get mapping to retrieve all the users from the database, and here we can add some endpoint. Let's say it's a users, and we can give the return type should be list of user details, and the method name should be like retrieve all users. We are not going to pass any param into the method name, and we are going to retrieve all the data from this user service, and we can call the respective method on the service. We need to add all the imports for list. Seems good. Now it will return the list of user details. Now here, instead of returning the list, we can simply use response entity. We can wrap the return type into this, so that it will provide the status details and all whenever it will return the response. And inside this response entity.ok, we can wrap our return type into this one, and we can save it. So this is for getting all the users. This is the endpoint for getting all the users. Similar way, we can create one more endpoint which will insert or create a new user into the database. We can use post mapping, and same endpoint we can use, only we need to pass the request body, and here we can change it like it will return only single user details which will be saved into the database, and we need to change this method name like it's a create user, and here we need to pass the request body because we are going to create a user. In that case we need to add new user details which is going to be submitted into the database or inserted into the database. Now this user details we need to call appropriate method like create user. Inside that we need to pass this user details, and we can save it. Now this endpoint get mapping will return all the users existed into the database, and this is for creating a new user into the database. Now we can save it. We are done with all our coding. Now let us test our APIs controller. We can save. Now let us run our application and check how it goes. can use maven install, so that it will create one jar file, and we are using the embedded Tomcat for this, and this is the jar file. We can see inside target folder it has created. We can refresh this. Yes, now we can run this jar file from command prompt, or we can use option like run as, and here we can use this Spring Boot app. Now we can see our application is started successfully. It is using the embedded Tomcat, and it is running on port 8083. Now let us test our endpoints. Now let's say this is 8083 and users. Here for body we can use raw and JSON. We can select and we can click on send button. Now here it is showing the empty list because we do not have any data as of now. So let us add one entry. Let's say we can add name, and here we can say it's Suresh, and next like we can add email, same like suresh@gmail.com, and after that we can add address, and for address we can use like, let's say it's a Pune. Now instead of get we can use post method, and let us check. Seems good. Now we can see it has added successfully one entry into the database. Now if you want to cross check into the database, let us open our YAML file, and this is the h2 console. This URL we need to use to check into the database. Now here we can use HTTP like here 8083, and we can use h2 console. Now we need to pass our database URL, like here our database is user_db. We can cross check into the properties file like user_db, and what username we are going to use, dev, and password like it's dev@123. Yes, we can see connection is successful. We need to add password as well, dev@123. Seems good. Now we need to add this URL, and along with the database userdb, and this is the username and this is the password. Whatever we have details we have mentioned into the properties file, that all we need to use. Now this is our database. We can run this select query and we can see we have only one entry inside database because we have added one entry. Now let us add one more entry, like here is a Sachin, and Gmail we can use sachin@gmail.com, and it's in Mumbai. Seems good. Now we have two records. Now let us call the get method and check. Seems good. Now it is showing two records which we have just added into the database. Now let us run this select query. We can see we have two records we have successfully added, and it is retrieving as expected. Now with this we are done with our creation of first microservice, and what all things we have done. Like for this we are using the embedded Tomcat. Using Spring Boot we have developed this, and we are using one dedicated port like 8083 for this microservice. And next thing, we are using its own database like H2 database we are using for this microservice, and we have created two endpoints using the REST controller, which is for getting all the data and creating the data into the database. I hope you must have enjoyed. Please do not forget to like, subscribe and share. Thank you so much for watching this.